Are you ready?
Yeah,
Yeah, you're good?
yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. All right. So let's get started. Okay, Pedge. So, hi, everyone, and welcome to the Bear Experiment podcast. I'm your host, Monica Clavijo. And today, my special guest is Pedge. Pedge, right? Am I saying it correctly? Pedge?
Pej.
Pej, Pej.
Good
Okay,
to be
so
here.
thank you so much for joining us. So Pej is a compassionate and experienced drug interventionalist dedicated to helping individuals and families overcome the challenges of addiction. Drawing on his own experience and extensive training, Pej designs tailored interventions that foster trust, empower change, and lay the foundation for lasting recovery. Now, with a focus on evidence-based practices, PEJ supports families in setting boundaries, improving communication, and creating a path to healing. An advocate for addiction awareness, he shares his insights to inspire hope and break the stigma surrounding substance abuse. So thank you so much for sharing your experience and all of your knowledge with all of us here on the Bear Experiment today. I've been following you for quite some time now, and you know, falling out of the midst of a life of addiction, that's got to be so difficult. And it's also so amazing when you speak to somebody that's is now coaching and helping others that are also struggling.
Mhm.
So why don't we start with that you perform interventions with people that are addicted to alcohol and drug abuse. Why
Mhm.
don't you start with that? What exactly is it that you do?
Well, I mean, as an interventionist, I've been doing this professionally over a decade. But I think I've been doing interventions pretty much my entire sobriety, which is about 17 and a half years. And, there's always different types of people that I'm asked to come and help. And some of them have drug addiction to certain types of drugs like meth, like fentanyl, like heroin, like cocaine. And then there's some people that have straight up alcoholism. And so, like, in order for me to do an intervention, I have to see, I got to meet them where they're at. I have to see what the issue is at hand. I have to see how it's affecting family members or friends or a loved one. What's going on? Get a good picture of how the person's living, where the person's living, if they're living. Some of them are homeless. Some of them are living in somebody's house.
Right.
Some of them are living in their own house. So I just by kind of you know putting together gathering information and putting it all together, I get a better picture of what I'm dealing with, what I'm up against, and how to go about it. And I can kind of formulate a plan within myself of what kind of modality to use because I use many different intervention modalities.
Now, I would imagine that the majority of the people that are contacting you aren't necessarily the people that are struggling with the drug addiction or alcoholism. It's usually a family member or loved one that's contacting you because they're so desperate, right? They don't know what to do anymore.
Yeah, usually when it comes to see, so I'm not just an interventionist, I'm also a recovery coach, and I do a lot of different types of coaching, both sobriety, recovery. We do companion work too, transports and things like that. And then I also I'm a sober living operator for some very structured places. But the people that are usually seeking my intervention services are loved ones, like a family
Right.
member, a mother, a father, family, or friends of someone, or a husband, a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend. Those are the ones that want me to try to help their loved ones as an interventionist. Now, there are people that do seek my help and assistance, that find me on social media. Yes, I'm labeled Pej Interventions, but often they'll hear the way that I speak, and they have questions and they want questions answered. So there, you will get an addict or an alcoholic that does reach out to me and wants to get questions answered to try to help guide them to get out of whatever their affliction or addiction is. But nobody's ever actually called me and said, I need an intervention for myself.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, it might happen. You never know, right?
You
Maybe
never
somebody in,
know.
they're just at the end of their wits already and they don't, that's it. You're like their last hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why don't we get a little bit more information about you? Why don't you tell us, clearly you're a very educated, smart guy. You have great charisma. Like, how did you get started in a life of drugs and addiction?
I mean, so as I was saying, I'm in recovery now 17 and a half years. So I'm a Persian man, Iranian man that was born in Germany, raised in Utah. And we came to the States when I was 5 years old. I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah for the first 10 years of my life. I definitely felt uncomfortable in my skin. I was always, um, you know, comparing my insides to other people's outsides. I had a relationship that started with drugs and alcohol at a very young age. I tasted alcohol at least at 8 or 9 years old because my dad would
Wow.
give me sips of it. But I had my first drunk at 12. Like when I became 12 years old, I drank. I drank to get drunk. I smoked to get high, and I also huffed gas to get high and escape. And I think the escape I was seeking at that time was just kind of my own discomfort. A lot of it might have been an experimental phase as an adolescent, but I also, there was certain things going on in our home. My dad was a certain way. He was a very angry man if he didn't do what he wanted to do, and he was a very loving and happy man. So, I just kind of gravitated at a young age towards other people that were outcasts and did what the outcasts would do amongst each other. We moved to California when I was 15. By the time I was 16, I was, heavily into all kinds of drugs. I think a lot of kids do that. The experimental phase becomes more of an addictive phase for some, where they're doing it all the time, seeking it. I was seeking it. I was um, drinking on the weekends with my friends, but pretty much smoking weed and doing other stuff during the week. I got into cocaine at a very young age. We were rocking it up at 16, learning how to do that, freebasing cocaine. This was the late 80s. It was an era, it was a time. And then
Right.
later on, then also I remember when I was 17, I had a gruesome car accident. I was driving a car. I hit someone that was on a bicycle. That person ended up passing away 4 days later. His mom took him off of life support because he wouldn't have been able to live a normal life. He would have been a complete vegetable. And so this really, it messed with me because even though I was already a young man that was um, using drugs, if you want to call it recreationally, I think it was a little more addictively than recreationally at the time. This became an ultimate excuse that this kid lost his life. How am I going to process this? I might as well just get loaded to this guy. So I did lots and lots of drugs. I also started to get into a lot of trouble at that young of an age. I was in and out of paddy wagons, police cars, jail cells, holding cells, things like that as an adolescent before I even turned 18. And I found my way into a courtroom and thus started my this future of being in and out of the system, or ducking and dodging police and things like that. I was in a psych ward when I was in that facility as an adolescent, and later in life, as much as I try to convince myself that I'm not going to get into trouble anymore, every time, because of the type of lifestyle that I was partaking in, meaning drug using, drug dealing. And again, when I say it was a certain era, I think you probably know that
Of
era.
course, of course. I
Yeah,
lived it as well. Yeah,
yeah.
it wasn't as frowned upon it as it is today.
Right. Like we didn't have friends that were overdosing and dying on
Right.
fentanyl within the next 5 seconds, but we were going to raves and we were going to nightclubs
Exactly.
and strip clubs, and there was a scene. There was a scene that it consisted of partying. Like we drank, we used, we had a lot of fun. Like I'm not gonna lie, like the 90s were a fun time. I was in my 20s. I created a business. I tanked a business. The business was funneled with money that was funded through drug sales. And the business did well for itself until it didn't. And
As a lot of businesses in the 80s were, right? Like
exactly, exactly.
that was also the norm.
That's exactly. But see, I didn't know anything about recovery or getting sober. I did have more run-ins with the law when I was 30. And I'd been to my first sober living at the age of 30. I made my way out of there as fast as I could. And by the time I was 35 years old, I was a homeless man living out of my car. And I had nothing going for me. I'd lost the trust of my family.
Of
I'd
course.
lost I'd lost the trust of my closest friends, and even my drug dealer didn't think that I was worthy of his services. So I ended up going into a recovery home, which functioned sort of like a rehab. There was a therapist that came in once a week. There was a counselor that was like a case manager to me. There were groups, and there was, it was a 12-step environment. So I was pretty much raised by giants, like by people that were in recovery before me that really talked the talk, walked the walk. There was a house that was very assertive, but also came with lots of love. And I had some great mentors that were placed in my path by God and showed me the ropes of recovery. And one of them early on was taking me on these, I wouldn't call it 12-step calls because he himself was a professional in the field, but he would take me to people's houses and he would intervene on people's lives. And that's where I got the idea first of watching somebody go to try to help somebody who probably really didn't want the help, but they were called on by that person's family, which later I come to find that's an intervention. And then obviously, like there was a TV show Intervention and all these
Right.
other things.
Right.
But yeah, but later in when I got to about 7 years of sobriety, the spirit of the universe brought a great man into my life who his name is Earl Hightower, who's a world renowned interventionist. He's also very popular in the 12-step world. He's probably got one of the most powerful stories that anyone has ever heard. A lot of people know of Earl. And so Earl took me under his wing, both in the 12-step sense, he became my 12-step sponsor, but in the professional world, he took me under his wing as an interventionist because he was already doing this for decades. And he taught me the ins and outs of being an interventionist.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So okay, so you start with alcohol and you start with marijuana, right? That's kind of like the starter drugs during adolescence that people kind of start playing with. When did you start dabbling with harder stuff like cocaine and heroin and crystal meth? Like when do you get into that level playing field?
Yeah, I think most people, at least back in our day, started with the weed and the alcohol, and that's
Right.
that's what it was for me. Gasoline was something I was huffing at 12 too, the same time as those others. I that was as heavy as a inhalant that I was doing at the time. Now the cocaine was at 16. There was a guy that was in my school whose dad worked late hours in the hotel business, so he had a lot of coke. He would stay up late at night, the father would, and we got our hands on his supply. So we were snorting coke at 16. We were smoking coke within a couple of weeks. We there was no Google to learn how to rock this stuff up. We had heard how to do it with baking soda. So two little 16-year-olds cracked out, not normal. Hallucinogens came shortly after, everything from mushrooms
Right.
um, to acid, LSD. Now,
Mescaline was another
mes
big one back then. Yeah.
mescaline came later. That was in my 20s. But here's another one. I remember that when I was into cocaine in my late teens, someone gave me a line of this stuff called speed. And well, I had done some crosstops before, which are old school, like speed, right? But this person gave me this stuff called speed, which was also called
Crack?
crank.
Crank. Okay.
Crank. Okay.
Okay.
Crack was definitely when we would rock up the cocaine. That was crack,
So
smoking
that's
crack.
different. So that's completely different.
Much
Crank and
different.
crack. Okay. Gotcha.
Crank was it was biker dope. It was like basically this meth that if you did a little line of it, you would go until a few days later. Like you'd be up, you'd forget to eat, you'd forget to sleep, and you were just on one. And so I tried it one time in my later teens when I was already doing coke, and I didn't like it, and I didn't think I would like it. But what happened was I also had body dysmorphia. So because of me not being satisfied with the way my body looked,
Mm-hmm.
being this high school kid that like saw other people around him getting these big, nice physiques, I come to find that they were using steroids. So I started getting my hands on steroids. And when I would use steroids, that would enhance my muscles and make me look more muscular and big and all. The problem was that when I would come off a cycle of steroids, I'd smoke a gang of weed, and when I would smoke all this weed, I would eat, and then I would gain weight, and I was kind of becoming overweight, and so that would definitely mess with my body dysmorphia. So I go and ask a few other people, like, "How are you guys losing all this weight?" And they'd say, "Well, we're doing speed," and I'm like, "Oh, I've tried that before. I didn't like it." And they're like, "Well, you want to lose 10 pounds real quick? This is how you
That's
do it." So I was like, "Okay, give me some of that." So I got into snorting meth from the time I was probably 19 till like 23. And I got to this period and I started selling drugs at a young age. At 17, I was selling different types of drugs. So, and I would sell drugs to be able to have drugs,
so
right?
you're 19 to 23. That's a significant amount of time to be doing math. You look fairly you look like a normal person and you don't look right. Like meth, I've always heard and seen videos and pictures, the mug shots where these people are like falling apart because they're constantly picking on their face and they're just like
Yeah.
aging like, 10 times more than everybody else.
I mean,
So,
we had people around us that definitely would look like that, but here's the thing. I ended up stopping meth at 23 because I really hated what it was doing to me. Like there was this certain soul sickness. The problem, Monica, was that even though I quit doing meth, I didn't quit doing other drugs. I didn't know about recovery. I didn't know I needed to recover.
yeah.
I thought that meth was the problem. I would say things like, "This is the devil's dandruff. I've got to quit." So when I finally quit that, I continued to keep doing other drugs. I got into heroin for a while because I hung out with some people that were doing it. I didn't think I'd become a heroin addict, but I became addicted to heroin. And then later, being a Persian man, there was people that were doing opium. And when I say opium, there was different types of opium. There was opium that the hippies had that they would call it like it was like a certain smell and flavor and taste, but it certainly wasn't what these Persians were getting me. These Persians were getting old country opium, which by the time I was in my mid 20s, I got very addicted to that. It wasn't a head high, it was more of a body high. It was a lot of a ritualistic fashion of doing it. You like we'd sit and we would drink tea and have chocolate to kind of mess with our bloodstream and our blood system, but also I do this opium not knowing I'm addicted to this stuff. And so after doing it for 6 months straight, always smoking it, I got to a point where I didn't do it for a few days and I experienced physical withdrawals like I'd never experienced before, worse than the heroin, right? And so when I experienced that, I was like, I never want to feel this way again. I went through my own detox of quitting that, but again, I didn't quit other drugs. And later, I got into a relationship with a female that was 22 and I was 27. Mind you, remember, I quit doing meth at 23. I was anti meth. I thought I'd never do meth again. And when I got with this female, she had a twin sister and another friend, and the three of them were just getting into meth. And experienced drug user that I was, needed to let them
I'll
know
show you.
how about this? I've done this stuff too. It started very gradually with the meth again. I didn't think I would ever smoke it. I thought that was for junkies. I thought I could only snort it, but I realized that at that point, within a few years, the meth I was using a few years back was different. That was crank, that was crystal methamphetamine. This was this was glass. And so this stuff was
Mm.
washed with acetone and you could smoke it. And so these girls were like using some of that. I got into it with them, and that's where it just took off. Like I went from the time I was about 26, 27, my addiction to meth it trumped everything. Like there was no other drug except for ecstasy that was as important to me, and GHB that was as important to me as meth. I lived for meth morning, noon, and night, and I was enslaved to that drug for the next decade.
And how often were you doing it on like a weekly basis?
Every single day.
Every single day.
Every hour of the day, every moment. Like remember, being a drug dealer, you have a large supply. By the time I was 30, though, I got raided by the methamphetamine task force because they thought I was going to cook meth, which I really was, but I didn't. I hadn't started yet. Like we were Breaking Bad before it was even shot for a
Gotcha.
TV show. Um, and so what ended up happening was uh, I became my own best or worst customer. So I just started basically using my own drugs, and it wasn't even worth selling it anymore. I was just using it. I became a full blown meth addict for the last decade of my using. And by the time I was 35 years old, um, you know, meth was my demise. It brought me to my knees.
So you were snorting it and you were
No,
smoking it and
at this point, I
smoking
was
it. Were you ever
yeah.
shooting up?
No, I was never shooting up. I was always afraid of needles. The only thing I ever shot up was I would shoot steroids into my ass, and so
Okay.
but that was about it.
Okay. Okay. So, a lot of people talk about, so what's the difference between the feeling, since you've done them both, of heroin
Mhm.
to crystal meth? Like, what's the difference as far as like the euphoric feeling that people talk about, that you're on this high for forever? I hear a lot with crystal meth where it's a big gay drug,
Yeah.
because and they're into the orgies and it's all these guys together and they're having sex for days. And I had another gentleman, Dr. Dallas Bragg, who is now also an advocate and helps homosexuals that are struggling getting off crystal meth because he was on it for so many years, and he's also been sober for over 7 years, and he's doing, like I call it, what you guys are doing, the Lord's work. But what's the
Mm.
difference between heroin and crystal meth?
It's funny that you say that about the gay community because when I was selling meth as a former drug dealer, my greatest customers were homosexuals. They were
Yeah.
gays. They
Yeah.
they loved it. And what comes with meth is there's a lot of drug driven sex. So there's different types of obviously there's stimulants, which cocaine, meth, these are seen as stimulants, right? And then there's depressants, there's heroin, there's alcohol, marijuana, right? These are depressants. So there, there's different types of highs. Like when it comes to weed, there's a certain onset that makes you feel a certain way, and it makes you feel gleeful and happy-go-lucky, and the music sounds better, the food tastes better, the movie's more interesting, right? With heroin,
But I'm going to interject here for a second
yeah,
because, like, I am that person since I was a teenager, and the
uh,
majority of my friends do love marijuana, right? That's like it's a very popular, common drug that people use,
let me
successful
guess, you're the
professionals.
paranoid one.
Do you don't want me near you? I just think the cops are coming.
Yeah.
We're going to get arrested. We're going to go to jail. I am no fun to be around.
No, I mean, there's always going to be that one person that the weed does not agree with. They don't
Mm-hmm.
agree with the weed. Um, for me, I loved weed. Weed was one of my first loves and passions. It just made me feel really good. But unfortunately, with weed comes a lot of munchies, and with munchies comes a lot of putting weight on
Yeah,
when
you
you have
blow
body
up.
dysmorphia. So
Mm-hmm.
then you're going to start seeking other stuff. I didn't really think I would ever try heroin. I kind of got pushed into it because I was going to get some drugs with some Mexicans that thought I was Mexican. And they said I was ashamed of my heritage if I didn't do some Chiva. So I ended up doing some heroin with them. By doing it, when I first tasted it, I realized right then, oh, this stuff tastes kind of good. And then on
And
top of
with
that,
the heroin, you were smoking it or you snort it?
smoking it. Smoking it. And
Okay.
then when I did like I realized like I wanted more. And so like it had a different taste, a certain taste and a certain feeling outside of weed where it kind of just would just like gel you. Like you just wanted to sit there and relax. It was very
Yeah.
relaxing, right? Same with the opium. When it came to cocaine, cocaine was sort of a recreational party drug.
Mm-hmm.
Like cocaine and alcohol went really well together. They complemented each other. If you did it, like you could do coke and feel the effects of alcohol in a different way, and you could do alcohol and feel the cocaine and the effects of it in a different way. Coke would make me impotent. It didn't even make me sexually active. It would make me more um want to just like party all night long and just get a
Alert,
lot of it.
awake,
Yeah.
alert.
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
It was a really to me it felt like a fun party drug. Meth was a different animal. When it comes to the world of stimulants, meth was way more powerful than Coke. Coke was like a poodle in comparison to the meth that was like a Rottweiler. Like meth had this euphoric feeling where you almost feel like you have all the answers to the universe and you just want to just
You're like on another level. You're just like in
yeah.
another world when you're
Like
on.
have you seen the movie Limitless? Like the way
I
that he
haven't, but I did see one of your clips where you're talking about it, and I've heard a lot about that movie where it's kind of that euphoric feeling, right?
it's just like
Yeah.
it's just this amazing feeling where there it's like ultimate bliss, right? Like you and on top of that, your brain is going like it's going at so many miles per hour where you just feel like you've just got all the answers and you
To
must
everything. You've got the answers to the universe. To
you
yeah.
and on top of that, like OCD kicks in and you want to start cleaning things and you want to like perfect things and put everything in order. But when you just put that whole bookshelf together and put all those books up, but then you think, no, the bookshelf should be over there. So I got to come over here and put it over this way. My feng shui's off. And now I can fix my feng shui and I've got to put the books in like alphabetic, numeric order, like all that stuff. So your brain is just like on overdrive.
So theoretically, like starting crystal meth, you're gonna be a superstar in the beginning until then you become addicted, and then it's all downhill from there.
Well, it depends. It depends on what you can interpret as downhill. There's a lot of people like myself that really thought I had a control on the meth. Like for one, I never experienced psychosis myself. However, I
Hmm.
saw people in psychosis, and that can come from sleep deprivation. That can come from being malnourished. That can come from dehydration. Many different things will put a person in a state of paranoia because of meth. me personally, I felt like it was my fuel to be able to be more productive and effective on a daily basis in my everyday activities. The problem with meth is a lot of people will want to create, a lot of people will want to produce, uh, do things, in creative ways, right? However, every project seems to go unfinished. So there'll be a pile of this over here because
Gotcha.
I'm creating this, or there'll be a pile of
Because your
this over
mind, you
here.
can't keep up with everything that you're trying with
You,
the way that your mind is racing at that point.
you're just ahead of yourself
Yeah.
constantly. Yeah. And
So,
and definitely can make you feel when the come down of it will make you feel really evil minded, you're really angry, agitated. You are short tempered. People will put you to the test even if they're not trying to put you to the test. You could feel that way. Also, there's a lot of distrust. Like you don't trust people. You feel like people are out to get you, or the
but yet you're hanging out with a bunch of people that you shouldn't trust, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I was telling that to a couple of guys in my house the other day. You know, I would hang out with people that were lower companions. I didn't realize that I myself was a lower companion. I would
Right.
always look over my shoulders because I didn't want them to take advantage of me. And they were probably looking over their shoulders because they didn't want me to take advantage of them. But guess what? We needed each other. We had
Right.
a shared drug
You had a
that I would
vested
hope that
interest. Yeah. Yeah.
that
Not a
I
lot
would
of people
hope
want to do
I
that.
hope they share some with me, and I'll be happy to share some with them too.
Yeah. Let me ask you
But I
this.
don't but
So,
I don't trust them.
right, right, right. It completely makes sense. So from the moment that you start doing like the harder drugs, like let's stick to crystal meth, how soon from the first time that you tried it did you say to yourself, "Fuck, I'm
Well,
hooked"?
cocaine was an immediate addiction. Like I had already learned about it in health class years before, but when I did my first line of coke ever, I thought it is on and popping. Like there was this ultimate euphoria that overtook my head,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized like this is what I've been searching for my whole life is to have a feeling like this.
Right.
And what is this, right? It's this feeling of again like I just love my life. I love the world. I love this sensation. It's like this in like you can't even explain it, right?
No,
It's like
you feel I've been there,
yeah,
in my younger days. But yeah, absolutely. I can certainly relate to that feeling of you are the baddest businesswoman in the room. Like, give me the hardest problem. I'm gonna solve it for you because you're
that's right.
just, you feel like you're like invincible when you're on that until you're not. And
Yeah,
then it all goes to shit, right? That's the problem.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So let's talk about marijuana because, the marijuana that was available when we were 20 is not the same marijuana that's out there today.
Right.
And from what I am hearing more and more through professionals and psychologists that are out there, they're saying that there's a lot of induced psychosis through the THC that's in marijuana right now. Is this something that you're seeing with the people that you're working with that do use marijuana, where it is causing long-term psychosis or long-term damage?
Yeah. So, Monica, I'll tell you this right now. It's such a good question that you asked because I think it's of great importance that we talk about this stuff. You know, the marijuana that we used to see back in our day, I have this feeling like we're probably from the same era, right?
I'm
Um,
48. I was born in 76.
okay, so we're from a similar era because I'm
Yeah,
53. So, and I
we're
was
right
born in
there. Yeah.
71. So there's certain types of marijuana. Even back then, when we were first smoking weed, we would hear about Acapulco Gold, or
Hmm.
like there was those people back then when we were younger were bragging about that stuff, and we're like, no, man, like we get Durban poison, like we get them Northern Lights, like so like we were trying to show off and say that we get better weed than these old
Right.
timers that are always talking about their outdoor weed.
What was it?
Um,
The purple haze and the
yeah, exactly. So then what I start, and obviously like we would every so often extract THC and make some brownies, pot brownies. Like we made
Mhm.
pot brownies back in the day, which these days is called edibles, and edibles are sold in many different shapes, forms, and fashions. I mean,
Correct.
it's everything from cookies to lollipops to all that stuff. However, they also extract the concentrate from the THC and sell that too. And it's distributed through things that we never knew would ever exist back in our day, places like dispensaries where it's
Correct.
legal to sell this stuff.
Yeah.
And so there's people that get their hands on this stuff. So let's take a look at what concentrate is. If it's concentrate, that means it's in its most potent form. It means there is no leaf to burn, right? There's
Hmm.
no bud to burn. You are basically smoking a very powerful, potent portion of THC,
Hmm.
the most powerful, right? So then you got people that are doing carts. They got weed
So
pens.
the cartridges that people are buying now when they're vaping, the marijuana, and there is that stronger than
Yes.
if you're smoking it? It is, right?
I guess it depends on the person. I'm certain that if I'm not mistaken, I remember that THC, you built a tolerance. So if you smoked a lot of weed over a period of time, you're going to have to keep smoking more and more to even be able to get a good high. So
Right.
I would imagine now if people are smoking the most potent form of it, you're either going to get super high all the time, or you're uh, building a tolerance and just needing to smoke a lot more to be able to even get high. Regardless of the fact, what happens based off of the way people's brains function, there are people possibly that have had predispositions. And if they are smoking stuff, they could go into psychosis. The same way that you used, if you ever did weed, Monica, and you'd go into that paranoid state,
Every time.
times that by 10, times that by
Right.
100. If a person, and so what's happening these days, and there's going to be a lot of marijuana smokers, a lot of THC smokers that are going to disagree. And they're going to tell you, no, 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 that doesn't
Right.
happen. No, it
Doesn't happen to
happens.
them.
It doesn't happen to them, but it happens to people.
Yeah.
I have had people on my podcast. I've had people that I've interviewed that have had straight up psychosis as a result of THC. Now, there's also something called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, which is basically when they smoke weed, um, they vomit.
Oh, okay.
So that makes them vomit. And I mean, obviously that's not healthy.
Yeah.
This is affecting you in a way.
Yeah, your
Uh,
esophagus. Right, right. That can't
all
be good
your
long term.
esophagus, your
Right.
throat, all the different things. So, and that's called CHS. It's cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. That is what I'm hearing a lot of. It's happening to a lot of people. Then there's also this. This should be talked about. There are teenagers that are finding me on TikTok all the time, and we have this conversation quite often. I'll make one video about depersonalization or derealization or two in the same, and kids that are using the carts, or kids that are using counterfeit carts, or kids that are smoking a weed pen, or kids that are smoking regular potent marijuana have what they develop derealization or depersonalization or both, which is sort of these best way to describe it. I believe this is the onset to potential psychosis, right? Like they're basically their little young brains are using this stuff, and their brains are going in 100 miles an hour in different directions. They start to become highly paranoid, or even see themselves from outside their body and contemplate if their life is even a reality anymore, right?
So,
Like,
oh, so then let's get into that a little bit just so that I can better understand it. So, what are some of the signs of somebody that's in full-blown psychosis? Like I remember in South Beach, I was working in a television station out there, and on Lincoln Road, I would walk during my lunch hour or after work. I would go to happy hour. I was 20 years old, and there was this lady who was clearly she was homeless, and she would just walk down Lincoln Road, and everybody knew about her, and she was just talking to herself, and she was in some form of psychosis, and apparently she was in a war, and she was just talking to herself about the nukes coming in and the
yeah.
planes and get down. And she was just constantly in her head. She would pick up the payphone and just keep talking to herself. Clearly, that's psychosis.
I mean,
How can you tell when somebody's starting to get into a full-blown psychosis?
so when I talk about predispositions, let's talk about schizophrenia,
Schizophrenia.
schizoaffective personality disorder. Sometimes people are undiagnosed. Often people that have bipolar or schizophrenia, it is diagnosed in their early 20s. That's when their brain is continuing to still develop. A lot of people's brains don't
Right.
stop developing until they're 30. So let's say they have some kind of predisposition. It might be hereditary. It might run in their family.
Hmm.
So you sprinkle some drugs on top of that, like meth, like weed, right? And that's going to intensify their schizophrenia, right? Which will then put them in a state of confusion where they actually think that they're certain that they're being talked about,
That
that
it's a
they're hearing
reality, that it's a
voices. That's
reality.
that's a total reality. Often, it's very interesting to hear people talk about how the FBI or the CIA are watching them,
Yeah, like
how
this
they
lady. Yeah.
how they have cameras in the cars, in the walls, in their shoe, in different, they're being watched. Obviously, where does that even come from? So why are these people even thinking that they're being spied? Some people think they have chips that have been put inside of their bodies, that the government's following them, tracking them. Some people think that they're gang stalked. Some people think that their computer's been hacked and that somebody's gotten into their computer and changed all their passwords and they're out to get them. And I'm not discounting that gang stalking doesn't actually occur or isn't
Right.
real, but I do tend to wonder when these people go into this paranoia, where is it stemming from? So
The
my
movies?
my my belief is that perhaps because they watch movies and they already probably live with lots of secrets in their own lives
Hmm.
that they are trying to protect. They don't want their secrets to get found out, so they go into this paranoid state that what if somebody finds out
That makes
about
sense.
I embezzled money from my job, or
Right.
I cheat on my wife, or I was
Yeah,
molested by my
and at
I was
that point
molested by my uncle and I never told anybody,
you
right?
can't control hiding it at that
So
point when you're in that level.
there's a lot of psychology that goes behind it.
So, when this happens, when a person is feeling this way, is this only when they're on the high of the drug, or is this something that can stay even when you're off of it, and then you have this like forever situation where you're in a constant psychosis?
So drug-induced psychosis comes in many different variables. There's very many different ways that it can affect a person. When it comes to methamphetamine, as I mentioned, dehydration, malnutrition, sleep deprivation is definitely a huge factor in all of this.
Yeah.
But when it comes to all of these different things that can happen to a person, depending on the person's brain chemistry and the way that they're processing or not processing, I have seen people go into immediate psychosis while on the drugs. I've seen people come off the drugs and remain in psychosis for a few minutes, hours, days, sometimes months,
Yeah. So it's on a
sometimes
case by
weeks.
case basis,
Yeah,
basically.
and
Yeah.
sometimes permanently. There's a guy literally that lives in my one of my sober livings right now that's in the backyard, walking around in circles all the time. He's absolutely certain that there's voices telling him stuff. Sometimes he gets frustrated with the voices and will punch himself in the face a lot. And I'll call his mom and say, we need to get him observed, send him back to the hospital. They need to adjust his medications. That's what they'll do. Sometimes that calms him down after he's been under observation and he's more stable. Then he comes back to us. And
So,
that's because he used to shoot meth.
right. So, one of the drugs that they give you during recovery so that you, I guess, can kick the craving is methadone, right?
Have you
What are your
watched any of my videos?
you think? You think? What are your thoughts on that? Like, is this, I mean, I know that it helps, right? Like I've heard about it before watching your content. I know that it does work. I know that a lot of people become addicted to methadone as well because it's also giving you kind of a high. And it's just like, are you leaving one addiction to get into another addiction at this point with methadone in order to stay sober? Is that really sober?
I mean, listen, Monica, I'm an old school head, and because I have experience with both heroin and with opium, I learned about methadone before I ever even got sober. There was some 2020 or 60-minute show where they talked about methadone and methadone clinics. I learned that methadone's intention and purpose was usually government funded, and or they were pretty much giving it at these methadone clinics to people to get them off of heroin because heroin was the dangerous one. And so they were basically giving a drug to people so they wouldn't have the desire or craving to do heroin. I
Right.
didn't know much about it. Then, before I got sober, we had the whole Oxy 80s craze. And during that time, I had a friend that was more of a depressant type of person that was using the Oxy 80s, and he would shoot them because he was also a heroin addict. And I got caught up with getting those pills and selling them to people so I could nurture my meth addiction. But this guy got on this stuff back then called Suboxone. And so I didn't know what Suboxone was. That was when I was before I even got sober, but he ended up staying on maintenance for 10 years. When I got into the field of addiction and started to learn, I come to find that people that go to methadone clinics usually are supposed to start with 30 to 40 milligrams. The reason why they are upping their dose is supposedly they're going into the clinic and saying, I need more because I'm feeling a way of sorts. So they'll up their dose, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they'll up their dose so much as to where they'll even get up to like 150 milligrams. And then if the clinic doesn't give them more, they'll find a drug dealer that will give them more so that they can be up in the 250 to 70 range.
Mm-hmm.
That's nuts. So it's basically they're still practicing addiction. Plus, there's people that go to methadone clinics, and just because they're not doing heroin and they're just on methadone, they're still smoking weed, they're still drinking, and
Right. Right.
these days they're even doing fentanyl. So personally, I think methadone is outdated,
Mm-hmm.
unnecessary. I don't think that people should be, even though people say it saves lives. Yeah, these days we've got this thing called the harm reduction community. Yes, they are definitely not harming themselves in the sense that they could overdose on heroin or fentanyl, right? But they're still enslaved to a drug, which is
Right.
helping them stay off of another drug, which to me that's still addiction. Plus, on top of that,
A hundred
they're
percent.
they're playing with it. When it comes to Suboxone maintenance, Suboxone, which is buprenorphine, was originally intended for pain. It was to suppress pain, right? It became because it's an opiate blocker. Later on, obviously, when doctors started to prescribe it to people to be able to not have the desire to do heroin, which was only heroin at the time, not fentanyl, people started doing sub maintenance, and maintenance became just staying on Suboxone, right? Obviously, the big pharma and all these agencies, if you will, want people to get the medication
A
um,
hundred
and,
percent.
and stay on it. So personally, I'm about abstinence-based recovery. If people choose to go that path and call themselves being in recovery,
Mm-hmm.
more power to them. That's
Right.
their recovery. Um, but I have a plethora of people that come into my path that say, I tried that route. I did methadone for all these years. My bones, it destroyed my bones. I did Suboxone for a number of years. It destroyed my teeth. It destroyed my bones. I'm so happy to be, I've now gotten off of it completely and I've reset my date because I'm not dependent on a substance anymore. I don't like methadone. I think it's shortchanging people of the opportunity to really live because they're still enslaved to a substance. And I'm a strong believer of God, and I don't think that God put us on earth. Yeah, maybe we become addicts, but if we overcome our addiction, I don't think God intends for us to be stuck on a drug to keep us off a drug.
Yes, yes, 100%. So you're talking about big pharma, right? And the pharmaceutical business, there's a lot of money behind it, governmental power. We all know how that works. So how many cases with everything that you're doing with your work and your advocacy do you see with people, for example, I fall off a ladder, I mess up my back and they put me on oxycodone? How many people get so addicted to the oxy that now they got to kick it up a notch because they got to go to the street because the doctor stops prescribing it and now they're shooting up and they're ODing from that.
I see a lot of these types of cases, and you have to understand we don't know who has the addict brain more intensively or more extensively, right? We've got people that they may never really have been a person that's been addicted to substances, or maybe they've had a past where they experimented with drugs, but they suddenly break their back, a ski trip or something happens where they have some kind of surgery and they're prescribed medications
For
like
the pain.
painkillers.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, when big pharma is pumping this stuff into society and people use it and then develop a dependency for it,
Yeah.
and it becomes something that they realize is really truly taking away their pain. Prince, for example,
Yeah.
I'm the biggest Prince fan you'll ever meet. Prince wasn't your traditional drug addict that was like using drugs because he had psychological problems. Prince was jumping off rafters in high heels and
Right.
ended up
Messed it up his back. Right. Messed up his
messing up
back.
his
Right.
legs. He messed up his
Oh.
legs
Mm-hmm.
and his hips. It was his hips. And so later on in life, sometimes you'd see Prince show up to an awards show on a cane, but the reality of it is that he had messed up his body so much to where he developed a dependency on pain meds. I don't care what other fans say that the record companies killed him or anything. No, Prince was an addict. He became addicted. He developed a dependency to painkillers, used them to the point where it became his demise because
Yeah.
when
Well, the same thing
he
happened with Elvis Presley, right?
Elvis had the doctor that would actually bruise around with him and had a case full of all the best
Mm-hmm.
drugs. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that a lot of these types of addictions, where it comes from, a prescription drug because you are in physical pain, do you think it's a mental disease that we carry, that it's genetically linked in our bloodline, where we just are by nature more, have more addictive personalities than other people?
I think so. And sometimes I think when it doesn't matter who the human is, if they do have some kind of physical pain and they end up using a certain type of painkiller that's going to definitely numb the pain, well, they're going to want more of it. So what happens? They're just going to want more
Yeah,
and more and more. And then the next thing you know, if their doctor cuts them off, then they're going to resort to hitting the streets and finding somebody that's going to give them something more powerful and potent, which it used to be heroin when people would hit the streets. But guess what? Nowadays, mostly everything is fentanyl.
yeah. So you talked about GHP. What is that?
GHB, GH,
GHB. Sorry.
GHB, that's gamma hydroxybutyrate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is we used to call it liquid ecstasy.
Okay.
It's
Oh, I've
it's
heard of it. Okay,
basically
now I know what you're talking about. Okay.
like you put a little bit in a,
There's another
uh,
word for it that they call it. Anyway, go ahead.
we used to just call it G, like straight up G. Like
Yeah.
I'm G'd out right now, right? But basically, I mean, it's been known to be sort of like a date rape drug. There are people that might be in a club or something like that, and if somebody slips them a little bit of G, they become. It can be very blissful. It can be very, very much like ecstasy in a different form, but it can also make you pass out. And if you pass out on GHB, it's easy to overdose on. It's usually a 4 hour, you're dead weight for 4 hours, like out cold.
Yeah.
Which then sometimes people take advantage of people that are in that position because they're out cold, right? GHB makes people do things that they wouldn't regularly do. There are people that get very addictive to GHB. I have seen it firsthand. People that were addicted to it for decades, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it is a very dangerous drug. If you mix it with alcohol, it could be lethal, right?
Okay.
And the secret to GHB is if you're ever around someone that has overdosed on GHB and passed out cold and you can't get them to become coherent, if you put some sugar under their tongue, usually they bounce right back out from GHB.
That's
It's kind of a
insane.
miracle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's insane. So can you share with us, just through your intervention work, without naming names, obviously, a story, like a crazy story of someone that was really at rock bottom and the family came to you for help and you found them in the streets and give us one of these really dramatic stories where the person now is in recovery and they're sober so that people can understand that it is possible to completely change and transform your life, that you
Yeah.
can get out of this you know horrible situation that you're in with drugs.
Yeah. So because I have a major background with methamphetamine use, both self-disclosing, like I myself am a former meth user, um, I I often and I know how to speak a meth person's language. I know how they think.
You
I know
got
how
the
they
lingo.
operate.
Yeah.
Right. usually get called by others to come and help people with meth problems because a meth intervention is not always easy. It doesn't usually go down on the first try. Um, you got to build rapport with the person and hopefully get them the help that they need. So right when pandemic hit, nobody was on planes, nobody was flying, nobody was doing anything. I got called by somebody. It was a through a therapist, had a family whose loved one was a 46-year-old guy at the time that was in Stockton, California, on meth, living in a house. He wasn't well. He was just tweaking morning, noon, and night. I was asked to come to his house and talk to him and intervene on his life. Um, I went up there. I called him from downstairs. At first, he told me he didn't want to talk to me. I said, please, I came all the way up here. I just wanted to come and check on you. Finally, he did let me up. I came upstairs. I spent 2.5 to 3 hours in this guy's apartment with him. The first 2.5 hours, he was very nice and welcoming. His house looked like a tweaker pad. There wasn't any furniture in the front living room. There was some broken furniture on the ground. I didn't ask until later what happened. He told me that he likes taking furniture apart. I saw that there was a bed in his bedroom, but it was just like a mattress on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't look like anyone had slept in it in a while. He had a computer set up, which was like masturbation station, right? Like just a place where
Right.
he would probably sit in front of all day.
Watching
His
porn.
watching porn. His dad pay he they bought this condo for him, so he had no house expense, no bills, all that was paid for. 46-year-old man and his parents were still sending him, they bought this place for him
Mm.
and sending him, over $1,200 a month or something like that, just to be able to eat food. I don't think the guy was eating much food. So I show up 2.5 hours. He's totally fine with me. Told me his whole life story. He had a lot to say. He was totally talking a lot, right? He had a lot to talk about.
Well, he's been alone for how long, right? Like just
Yeah, yeah. He told me stories of being in Stockton. Stockton's a little bit of a rougher part of California. I'd call it the armpit of California.
hmm
He told me he had been jumped. Before I even came to his house, I went to some 7-Eleven and saw the way people were living out there. Um, and then like the next half an hour, the last half an hour I was there, he went into this mode of becoming straight up demonic, angry, irate, calling me names,
Really.
opening the windows, shutting the windows, sweating profusely.
Why is that? Because at this point, like he's going through
I
withdrawals.
I believe he was going into psychosis. He or just his mistrust, like his distrust was kicking in. He was yelling at me so much that he was practically spitting in my face, and I just told him, "Listen, buddy, I just came to check on you, man. I was just worried about you. If you just allow me to put my shoes on, because he made me take my shoes off when I first got into his house. I
hmm
said, if you just allow me to take my shoes off, I'll leave you alone and I'll leave your house. I ended up leaving his house. And then on the back end, I was working with his family very closely and coaching them and showing them what they need to do and what they don't need to do and stop enabling. And so within a month, they put him in a position to where he got forced to have to. I had left my number with him,
hmm
and he ended up calling me and taking a train from up there down here to LA. I picked him up at a train station. I put him in treatment. He didn't like that treatment center. He went to another treatment center. After that treatment center, he finished out his treatment. I put him in sober living. I watched his case through and through. He ended up getting sober, and he ended up staying
Amazing.
sober for, yeah.
That's great. What a great story. That's a wonderful story. So then, talk to us, Pej. Somebody now that's listening knows somebody, has a family member, maybe it's their partner, maybe it's their husband, maybe it's their child. How do they find you? Where do they reach you? Give your information so that somebody that right now needs to call you tonight, where do they call you?
They can call me at my phone number, which is either 310-596-9356 or 949-751-7761. They can go to my website, pejinterventions.com. They can email me at pejinterventions@gmail.com. And then they can find me on TikTok at it's Pej, PEJ Interventions. I have a YouTube channel called Pej Interventions. I have a new podcast coming out
Mm-hmm.
soon. That's going to be called Primary Purpose with Pej. My old podcast was called Pej's Recovery Corner, but we are rebranding. And then, I'm on Facebook as Pej's Recovery Corner and Instagram as Pej Interventions.
Okay. So you're on all social media platforms. What's your podcast going to consist about this time around since you're rebranding? What's the focus?
The focus is always, we will always primarily focus on people with addiction, alcoholism, and mental health, people that are recovering or recovered. But we are also going to bring all different types of people from all walks of life to see what their primary purpose is. I'm talking doctors, physicians,
Yes.
psychologists, deep thinkers, people from different schools of thought, different spiritual backgrounds, people, spiritual practitioners and teachers, and all different types of guests. We're going to have very interesting characters come on.
I love it. I think it's really important to really share that information out there so that it comes from your perspective and others that have also been in the jungle, right, in the fire, and they can talk about their sobriety and how it is possible so that others can really resonate with that message. So let's close out the podcast. Paj, amazing information. Thank you so much again for meeting with me. One last message, one last message of hope for anybody that's listening, that's struggling, that's embarrassed, that's ashamed, that's in depression, right? That first initial phone call takes a lot of courage.
Uh-huh.
So give us why call us call you today. Why?
Listen, it doesn't matter who you are. I believe in anyone and everyone. Everybody can get better. I don't think that God wants his children to suffer or struggle.
Amen.
If anybody's out there that is struggling, that feels like they're at their wits' end, they don't know what to do with themselves, they don't know how to get help, or they're too afraid to ask, don't be afraid. There is a live person on the other end of that phone or in my message center. I might get to it a little bit late because I get flooded with different calls and different phone texts and things like that, but I will make myself available to you, and I'll do anything I can to try to help guide anybody into the path of difference, a different type of lifestyle, as opposed to whatever facade or certain lifestyle that they feel like they're stuck in.
Yeah. So I will be linking all of your social media names for TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, your YouTube, your podcast information, your contact information with your email and your phone number. For those that are ready to reach out for help, can do so. So again, Pej, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me on the Bear Experiment podcast. I really appreciate everything that you're doing. You are doing the Lord's work, my friend, so do not stop. I know how difficult that can be. I've known this very personal.
Thank you, Monica. You're
With
such a lovely human being.
Thank you.
Great,
Thank you.
great lady.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, for all of you watching, thank you again. Please remember to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss an amazing episode like the one that we're doing right now with Pej. And like and share this so that others that are really in need of listening to this message know that it's out there and can get the help that they need. So, thank you so much. And until the next episode.
All right.
All right, Paj. Good stuff. Thanks a lot, my friend. I really appreciate it. This was awesome. Yeah, keep doing what you're doing. Do not stop. Do not
Thank
stop.
you.